Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Easy Conversations podcast, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host, Furkan Dandia. In this week's episode, I'm excited to welcome my friend Sohayl Bhatti. Sohayl is an accomplished engineer working on healthcare projects in the construction industry. He is keenly interested in the nature of consciousness and reality and its intersections with mental health and building a meaningful life. Sohayl's approach to spiritual practice comes from self-discovery and exploration, including travel, immersion in nature, and meditation. He is also interested in using psychedelics as a therapeutic tool. In this episode, Sohayl shares his ayahuasca journey and explains how he prepared for his trip to the Amazon. He initially talks about attending a silent meditation retreat before deciding to travel to Peru for the full ayahuasca experience. Sohayl also shares how the shamans prepared him for the journey and all the little things he had to do to ensure he was ready. We also discuss what Sohayl got from his experience and everything that came up for him. I really enjoyed recording this episode with Sohayl because it was immersive. It gave me a first-hand understanding of what an ayahuasca journey looks like from someone who experienced it themselves. I really hope you can get a lot out of this episode and get to see what an ayahuasca journey can be like. And if you can leave a review at the end of the episode, I would really appreciate it. All right, Sohayl, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have. And part of the reason is, I wanted to have this conversation with you and share your experience with the listeners is because I'm working on a few things here and I've also got a few projects coming down the pipeline. So I think it's really exciting and relevant for perhaps the listeners to hear your story and see what comes up for them. But before we go down that route, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and let the listeners know a little bit about what it is that you do.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Furkan. Very excited to be on the podcast. Was excited to have this conversation since you first mentioned it to me a few weeks ago. So I guess quick introduction to myself. I'm Sohayl Bhatti. Being friends with Furkan for many years now. Live in Edmonton, Alberta. I work as an engineer, but part of what I want to talk a little bit about on this podcast is going to be a couple of trips that I took to self exploration, self discovery, meditation. Maybe talk a little bit about my thoughts on what I learned from those experiences, my thoughts on consciousness. Just excited to share.
Yeah. So it's like your literal and figurative trips, right? Both.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty cool stuff. I think for me, I've been fortunate enough to hear some of those stories. I haven't heard all of it, but it sounds really cool and exciting. And I'll kind of put that plug in. I am or will be doing other episodes around psychedelics and therapy, especially from that spiritual sense. And, obviously that's becoming a huge thing now as we're becoming more aware of the power of some of these plants, as we may call it, and the impact it's having on people, both from a mental health perspective and a spiritual sense. So I think it's really relevant. And I think for me, I got more interested in this area, really talking to you about your experience. I don't really know personally or know anyone personally. I'm starting to meet a lot more people, but at the time I didn't know anyone personally who had taken that leap and gone through that experience. So that's kind of part of the reason why I wanted to cover it too and share with the listeners what your journey was like. But before we kind of get into all those details, just wanted to understand what was your motivation behind wanting to do this? What was going on for you that you were like, okay, this is something I want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the first thing is I am kind of drawn to, whenever it comes to any kind of, if I'm having any kind of, say, hardship in my life
Mhm.
or mental struggle, or, just, and everyone goes through it. Your mind is just fuzzy. You got a lot going on in your mind, and you need a way to sort things through. I've always been drawn to almost retreating from the world a
Mhm.
little bit, and using that as a way to work things through. So like, that could be anything like going for a long walk, or um, I'm really into like hiking and camping, and like I love like just going out into the backcountry and disappearing for a few
Right.
days, and so um so I guess anytime and so like I'll see things like psychedelics, or long periods of meditation. There's almost something similar like that, where it's just like, okay, let's take a time out here. Let's and then let's use this as, maybe like an opportunity um for learning. So I mean, I
Right.
guess one of the first thing I was going to talk about, like, was a few years ago. It was 2017. I went on a 10-day silent meditation retreat.
Mhm.
It's called Vipassana. It's run by the Vipassana Foundation. They teach the same course. It's originally from Burma,
Mhm.
but they teach the same course all over the world. And we're fortunate enough here in Alberta, where we live, to have a Vipassana center just south of Calgary, um, and kind of on the Alberta Saskatchewan border.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, at that time in my life, I found that, there was a bit of hardship I was experiencing, and emotions. I was having a little bit of trouble with almost understanding and even control of my emotional response to, say, stressful situations, you know,
Right.
um, and I had been interested in meditation for a period of time ahead of that. I had done a
Right.
bunch of reading, had done a bunch of practice. I was really fortunate that my dad also, he had kind of gotten me into, really encouraged me to meditate, uh, to deal with stress, or to deal with, or just stressors in life, and
Right.
how to react to them properly, and kind of be able to step back and almost take like a
Yeah.
you as a third party to your own life.
Right.
And so, I'd done a lot of reading, and I'd heard about these silent meditation retreats before. And
Mhm.
so I decided to take the plunge. I applied, I think, in September, and it was I did one that was over the course of December into the new year. I think it was December 26th to, whatever 11 days later it was, early January.
Yeah.
And yeah, and just went. And
Cool.
I think a lot of people have, reservations about, whoa, like, I won't be able to talk for 10 days. And you literally you can't talk, you can't journal.
Yeah.
You get there, you turn in your phone, you turn in your car keys, you can't bring in a journal, like nothing. It's just you and your thoughts for 10 days. Um,
Mhm.
I remember we stayed in these dorms, and I had a roommate in the dorm, and I was staying with my roommate for 10 days. We would kind of go to sleep at the same time, and we were living in the same room, and never even spoke a word to him until the 11th day. And
Wow.
yeah, so, it was interesting. And it was intense, like, I mean, I guess it was a mini vacation for me, but it certainly wasn't a vacation. It
Right.
was work. Right. We woke up, we woke up at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
Bell went off, and we were in the meditation room at 6:30 a.m. From what I recall. And, and then it was 2 hours of meditation to start the day, and then breakfast, and then various periods of meditation, lectures, breaks, uh, until basically about 7, 8 p.m. And then you go to sleep and start it again.
Right.
It's like overall about 10 hours of meditation a day for 10 days in a row. It's about 100 hours. And,
Yeah.
and like to me, like, I mean, there was a lot of learning from it, but I would say to distill it a little bit, um, was you spent the first few days doing something called anapana, which was um, basically just concentrating on your breath, and very specifically, you're not controlling your breath at all. It's just very natural breathing, and
Mm.
um, and what you're concentrating on is the sensation of the breath uh, initially in your kind of your full nose going into your lungs or whatever, and then out. And that's all you're paying attention to for hours and hours and hours on end. And eventually you're honing down. You're just concentrating on the little ring the rings around your nostrils, just that little
Mm.
portion of skin. And,
Right.
then just what does it feel like for the breath
Mm.
to hit that piece of skin around your nostril, and then
Right.
back out, and you're just concentrating on just that for hours and hours on end. And um and it's interesting because it really, you learn to, you just like, there's so many things going on in your head, but like,
Right.
and you'll go back to your thoughts or whatever's happening, or the pain of just sitting down cross-legged on a cushion for so much time. but
Right.
you but you're really learning to train your attention on being able to focus on one thing. And then so after a few days of that, I believe it was day 4, they started Vipassana, which was the actual practice that you're learning. And it's, insight meditation is what it was called. It was, really, you're still using just your natural breath cycle, but you
Yeah.
go through a period of just observing the sensations within your body as you're just sitting there. And, everything from pain to pleasure to, kind of thoughts that are coming in your head, but you're mostly just trying to observe the sensations, like, oh, like, I've got a knot in my shoulder, or my head is
Right.
starting to hurt. I've got a knot here. And it was really interesting because you start to learn that, you'll start like, sensations in your body, like, say, for example, a pain. It starts as a very dull, low frequency vibration pain. Like, every sensation you feel is kind of like a pulse. And
Yeah.
initially it's a very low vibration pulse. But what they're teaching you is you just sit there and you'll pay attention to it. You might be sitting there paying attention to a certain feeling or a pain or a knot in your shoulder for 45 minutes, and that's all you're focusing on. And
Right.
eventually, as you focus on it and focus on it, it's like you're diving into the source of a sensation. You can unpack it, and you can start to unpack it almost like peeling back layers of an onion. And the frequency of vibration starts to increase, and it becomes, a sharper but higher frequency of
Right.
vibration. And eventually you've worked your way through it, and it dissipates. Right? And then
Mm.
something else pops up, and something else pops up. And so the way they explained it was, And, it's been a few years since I do this and since I've done it,
Right.
I'm, not an expert in any way. And so for any of the listeners that are listening, I would highly, I would very much recommend it, but,
Right.
don't take me as an expert in any means, but it was almost, what's it called? It was literally that. It's like, they called them like sankaras. It was almost like if you had an emotional response or some kind of
Yep.
trauma or some kind of, uh, reaction to a situation in your life, like these emotional reactions kind of lodge themselves into your body
Hmm.
as physical discomfort and,
Hmm.
or comfort or discomfort. And the idea
Right.
is to be able to, if you can sit and you can pay attention and, you can take the distractions of the world out, quiet, you're not talking to anybody for days. You can actually start to unpack these things using your brain and, and, and your attention rather, and, and start to kind of peel away at them until they kind of, go from that low vibration state to high vibration state, eventually dissipate.
Right.
And so I think like that was a interesting thing to learn,
Yeah.
and I just started reading a book called I'm only a few chapters in now, but it's called Dopamine Nation. And
Okay.
it's about, kind of like modern society's kind of
Mhm.
dopamine causing,
Right.
you know, uh, just activity. You know what I mean? You're always just chasing, 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 and kind of the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain.
Yep. Yep.
But you know, one of the most challenging parts of a Vipassana retreat is what they call like a sitting of strong determination. And I can't remember the word um,
Hmm.
exactly that they used for it, but it was after 4 days. Before you'd be sitting there for hours, but you could, if you start to get uncomfortable, which you will, sitting for hours on end, you can like stretch your arm, or you like
Right.
unhook your legs from sitting
Yep.
cross-legged for so long, and you stretch out a little bit, then you go back. But then the challenge is, okay, you have to sit for an hour and you cannot, like if your leg starts to go numb, like it's fine. Like you just have to deal with it. If you get an
Hmm.
itch on your neck or an itch on your arm, it's like you can't scratch it. You have
Right.
to sit there. Like that is the challenge. Right.
Hmm.
And that's very much against our natural instinct. If you feel
Right.
something, if you feel an itch, you're gonna scratch it. If you have like pain from sitting in a certain way, you're gonna stretch. But
Right.
the idea was, it's like, no, like work through the pain, like don't move, just breathe through it, just pay attention to it, and it's not gonna kill you. Like you might feel like your
Hmm.
leg is going numb, but you're not cut off your
Yeah.
circulation. Your leg's not going to fall off. It's just maybe
For sure.
and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like it's and I remember like the first time doing it, they would have one of those sittings, I think every single from that time forward, where it was like
Hmm.
actually do it. But I remember the first time, like I was uh half an hour into it, like it was painful. Oh,
Hmm.
like I had this sharp pain in my hip. My foot was going, I had some itch on the back of and I was like sweating bullets, and I was like, holy moly, not being able to, just teaching yourself not to react to the,
Yeah.
but I mean, like, but eventually you get used to, you're like, oh yeah, like you're like, handle this, like, it's
Right.
fine. The pain is there, but you're able to kind of dissociate yourself from it. It's just another sensation, you know?
Right.
And,
Right. Yeah.
so I think that was another, uh, and once you've actually learned to work past the pain, you can dive much deeper into the meditation as well. It's like a
Mm.
realization and a learning, and
Right.
it's uh, so I think even that, like like it's inevitable. Like every single one of us, as we go through life, we're going to experience pain, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain
Of course.
or whatnot. And our
Right.
society really is geared towards the avoidance of pain and the pursuit of pleasure, right? And it's, I would say that was another really good thing from this type of practice and this type of teaching. It teaches you how to, or gives you the experience of, well, hey, rather than trying to avoid pain for a while, why not sit there and observe it?
Right.
What
Right.
does this pain feel like? You've got this sharp pain in your, rather than reacting right away, um, and just trying to make it go away, pay attention to it. Focus your
Mm.
attention on it, and you find you're like, once you can get past the, oh, this hurts, like you're like, why does this hurt? Like, where is this pain where is this pain originating? And you start to pay attention to it. And again, it's that really low vibration, dull pain, you know, that it's it's there,
Right.
it hurts and it's taking a lot of your mental space, but it is a low vibration pain. But eventually you start to figure out, that, hey, this is actually, it's kind of an issue. It's kind of like starting in my toe. It's moving up my leg. It kind of hits my knee and then it kind of goes this way down my thigh. And then it
Mm.
finishes there. And then it goes away. And then like, you can start to see how this, almost like the signal is pulsing through
Hmm.
your body. And you start to pay more and more and more attention to it. And you start to kind of gain insight into like, how is this pain working and how is it flowing through your body?
Right.
Eventually, as you gain more and more insight to it, it stops bothering you. It actually just becomes interesting, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
the idea is to like observe your internal state
Hmm.
uh, from a position of interest, as opposed
Right.
to a position of just reaction. And
Yep.
so,
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to talk, and so there was a lot of things that you learn when you basically cut out the distractions from the world, which, there's so much that's going on. You really need to cut everything out and just observe inwardly. And you can see, after this, I was like, this is why people become monks. All right. There's a
Yeah. Yeah.
reason. Yes, there's a reason
For
why
sure.
people, like there's so much knowledge that is inherent in your own existence and your own body and your own, and things that you can learn. But you really need to cut out the noise so you can see the signal.
Of course.
And those are, yeah, there's part of what I gained from that. So, I mean, that was in the
Right.
winter of 2017. I
Right.
did that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think everything you covered there is really around the idea of being present and finding stillness. And to your point, we struggle with that because the way we've been programmed is to constantly be inundated with stimulations, right? And that's why it's so important that you check your phone in at the beginning. But even the idea of talking, a lot of us use just talking as a way of distracting ourselves. But in what you describe, you're sitting there with the pain, or how they describe it in Eastern philosophy as samskaras, right? We
Hmm.
have those come throughout the day. And sometimes it's not only physical pain, it could be emotional it, pain or something emotional that's trying to get our attention. And we just dive right into it and don't sit there in stillness trying to see, okay, what's coming up here? What does this mean? And to your point, let it pass through us. And I know
Hmm.
that sounds very cliche, or, we hear about it all the time. Let those emotions pass through you. But what you've explained is really what that looks like in practice, of
Hmm.
the idea of letting a physical sensation or something emotional pass through us by just sitting there and observing it and not really engaging with it or uh, attaching anything to it. It's just sitting there and being an observer. And that's where I think a lot of these, obviously I haven't done it to that extent, but they talk about that seed itself, the objective and the subjective. self that's observing all of this. So very cool, very cool. And I
Mhm.
think the whole kind of the reason why it ties into, we're obviously going to go into your whole ayahuasca trip, is this allowed you to at least build that practice of being able to sit and observe and be still and be present.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of what you were saying about the sankaras, that is what they, what was talked about in the course. Those are the kind of the blockages, or just like the
Yeah.
emotional lodges in your body. And there was, there's both, as far as being able to be like equanimity is kind of the goal, right? It's
Mm,
like awareness and
yeah.
equanimity, being aware of what's happening, um, and then being, having equanimity towards those emotions, whether they're cravings or aversions, right? You might have an emotion causes craving towards a certain thing, and then you
Mm,
dive first into it, you're like, this is great, like, this chocolate cake is delicious, I should just eat more of it, it's so good, right?
mm-hmm,
Or you have
mm-hmm,
aversions where, like for example, pain, right?
mm,
Where it's like, yeah, like our natural instinct is, as soon as pain happens, is to be averse to it. But where we should try and be is, whether it's a craving or aversion that pops up, it's like, let's be equanimous.
mm,
We can observe a craving for what it is, and observe it, not dive headfirst into it, right? Or we can observe an aversion to something, and uh, and be able to like observe it without running away from it right away.
mm-hmm,
Come,
mm-hmm.
um, and so training your mind to be able to do that is, you know, it just it helps with
Right.
life in general, because we're
Yes.
we're subject to those things all of the time,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, I think there's that aspect of us that wants to avoid that pain and seek pleasure. And obviously, to your point, there is that dopamine aspect to it. But I think the way I look at it, and I'm just going to try to frame it, is when we're seeking that pleasure, it's manufactured, right? And I think there is dopamine release when we voluntarily expose ourselves to pain as well. Like the closest example I can think of, obviously not in that meditative state, but one of the things I've been doing is cold exposure, and which is similar in a way. It's obviously a lot shorter, but it's exposing myself to that cold water, for example. And even though it's uncomfortable, it's painful, it's being able to voluntarily expose myself and then coming out of it because I found that stillness and presence of being exposed. I feel this surge of dopamine that is more a natural state rather than something I manufactured by seeking pleasure externally.
Oh, exactly. I mean, you almost got it by seeking pain, right? Which
Yeah.
is, as opposed to seeking pleasure. No, and like, I'm a big proponent of cold exposure as well. And I know, like, you and I have had lots of conversations about this.
Yeah.
Um, but really is like, when you hit that 4-degree water or whatever it is, it's cold, and
Mhm.
and it forces you into a meditative state right away, because you
Yeah.
literally cannot think of anything other than how cold it is. But to be able to stay there, your
Yeah.
breathing needs to be super focused.
Right.
You need to just, you're not thinking about anything else, right?
Right. Yeah.
You're just thinking about, okay, to focus on my breathing. I need to, like,
Yes.
you fall into this calmness.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
an incredible tool.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess, you kind of went through this 10-day silent meditation.
Yeah.
And then what was like the next step there? Like, what made you want to go to the Amazon and do this 10-day? And for me, like as much as your experience sounds appealing, the one thing
Yeah.
that really uh, I find difficult to think about is, as you've explained to me in the past, is the different types of insects and all the noises and all that. And that to me, being a city guy, really scares me or makes just the thought of it makes me very uncomfortable. But yeah, like help us understand what the next steps were, what kind of you were going through in your head, and what made you want to take that next step?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, I mean, I can say this much. I guess I don't really have an aversion to insects as much, or thing. I mean, I'm definitely a city guy too. I grew up in the city, but I've always, I guess, as a kid, like I was very fortunate enough to, my parents would, we went camping a lot as kids,
Yeah.
and I spent a lot of time in the forest, and uh, very grateful for that. And I've always really been drawn to nature, um,
Mm.
and spending time in nature. Um, the so I guess I've always really wanted to go to the Amazon rainforest, just to see it. The most biodiverse place on the planet. Um, it's really, it's unfortunately, it's under a lot of threat from
Yeah.
deforestation and climate change. And, it was a place that, even outside of, maybe going on a retreat or something, I'd always wanted to go as,
Right.
even from a kid. I just wanted to see it. And then, I had been interested in psychedelics for, um, a long period of time as well. Reading about experimenting with them, here and there. Microdosing, was a kind of a trend or whatever, say a few years ago, and reading about that. And I did a little bit of, experimentation with that, with microdosing things like, mushrooms and that sort of thing. So, but I always kind of, I guess I always had an interest in um, say like altered mind states and what you can learn from those kind of things, not just from a hedonistic sense, but even just from a curiosity sense, like, like these things can be used obviously in those hedonistic or whatnot,
Right. Right.
methodologies, and that's there,
Yeah.
right? But they also can be medicines, or they also are, um, uh, things that you can learn from. And,
Right.
I
And I
remember
guess the
I
difference really is if used responsibly, right? I just want to
Mhm.
make sure
Use
people get
responsibly,
that.
of course.
Yeah. Yeah,
No, like,
exactly. Yeah, sorry.
exactly. Yeah, and so, and I read a book, and I know it's like a documentary and stuff now. I haven't watched the documentary. I don't really watch a lot of TV or Netflix or
Yep.
whatnot, but, I read a book by Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind,
Yeah.
and I read it that year, so I guess, it would have been 2018, and, and it was really fascinating. I've been a big fan of Michael Pollan, even before that, and so when I'm like, "Whoa," like, one of my favorite writers is writing a book about psychedelics, like, fantastic. So, it was a fantastic book, like, I would recommend it to anybody. Again, I haven't watched the series on Netflix, and so I don't know or not, I imagine it is.
Yeah, I've
Uh,
watched it, yeah, and it's pretty cool because they
yeah,
walk you through the different psychedelics. I think it's 4 episodes, but it really
mhm,
gives you insight into the powerful nature, the healing nature of it, right? So, yeah,
yeah,
agreed, I would recommend it to people who are interested to check it out, whether it's the book or the documentary on Netflix.
mhm, absolutely. And so, like, one of the things that, there's a few things from the book that I had found, quite interesting, where, I guess it went a lot into the history of
Yep,
psychedelics, and the discovery, of mushrooms by the West, say in
yep,
the 50s, indigenous, indigenous people in Mexico. And,
right,
so I mean, that was all very interesting, fascinating stuff. And then kind of the latest research on kind of how they work. And one of the things I found really interesting analogy in the book, where they were talking about, imagine your mind as as a hill or a mountain, so to speak. And
mhm,
when you're born, there is a fresh, snowfall. and so it's this mountain with fresh snow. And then, once you're born and you start having experiences, your experiences are almost like somebody at the top of the mountain skiing down the
Mm,
mountain and creating tracks. And
mhm,
so as you're a kid or an infant, say between 0 and 5 years of age, especially when you have like early childhood development, those
mhm,
there's all these skiers basing on all your experiences making these tracks in the snow. And as you get older, your you're still having experiences, but you start at the top of the mountain and you start going down, but then you hit a track. And once you've hit that track, you kind of get stuck in that track because it's already
mhm.
there, right? It's much easier to
Right.
go down an existing track than it is to
Mhm.
carve a new track in snow, right?
Right.
And and so what uh and so what psychedelics can do is can temporarily erase those tracks. Dress
Right.
the,
Yeah.
dust the mountain with fresh coat of snow. And now suddenly
Right.
it's like, whoa, like you can start carving new tracks down the mountain. Right. And,
Right.
and, and you can
Right.
start creating connections in your mind that, that are outside of the tracks that were made when you were a young child, and start
Right.
seeing start getting new insights from that. And then,
Yeah.
eventually when it wears off, those old tracks still show up, they're still there. And so
Right.
then it's up to you to integrate your learning and, and, take from it what you will. You know what I mean?
Right.
You can still learn from things and do things differently, even if you've got those tracks that are baked into your mind,
Right.
but at
Yeah.
least you saw something different for a while.
Right. And I guess from a therapeutic standpoint, the reason why I
Yeah.
see such an overlap is because most of us aren't even aware that those tracks exist, right? We just program it. Well, I guess we're just operating this program. It's automatic, but
Hmm.
and that's the part of therapy I really like is helping people become aware of those tracks. And I guess psychedelics is just one avenue that's offering people the ability to see, hey, these tracks have been carved out and I've just been following them and I wasn't even aware of it, or I
Yeah.
was on a subconscious level, but now I can do something about it. Right. So that's why I think it's such a powerful experience. But yes, sorry, I just wanted to add that in there.
No, no, absolutely. It is, and really does, and then, it really does help with, therapy as well. And that's why psychedelic assisted therapy is such
Hmm.
an exciting, place of research right now. And one of the things the book went into also was just, the whole, it was really unfortunate, like, when psychedelics kind of first came into
Hmm.
in the Western world, in the 50s and the 60s, it was really, there was so much promise in treating things like alcoholism and,
Yep.
and other kinds of, issues people were facing. Like,
Yep.
you had people with severe alcoholism issues that were, uh, working past these problems after working
Right.
with a therapist, that was administering things like, mushrooms or LSD or whatnot. And there was all of
Right.
this research that was going on. And then the research just stopped in the
Yep.
60s when you started to have the counterculture movement and the whole summer of love and and it was seen as a threat, and the US government put a
Yeah.
stop to it, right? And
Right.
it took decades for it to come back until the 90s, really, where
Mhm.
research, started slowly happening again. Now it's, really on the upward trajectory again, right? Which
Right.
is fantastic to see, like in, it's legal now to go ketamine assisted therapy, and
Yep.
and we're on pretty soon. We will see, other, the MDMA assisted psychotherapy is there's a ton of research being done right
Yep.
now. And, within a few years, I think it'll become a therapeutic practice that's going to be available to people through
Right.
the health system.
Absolutely.
taken with other
Yeah.
psychedelics. So it's exciting to see because it actually really does help. Like these things, when used responsibly in a therapeutic context, in the right setting, which is something that, is talked a lot about in
Hmm.
psychedelics and Michael Pollan's book, but just in the field in general. There,
Yeah.
there's a big difference between doing mushrooms at a party with your friends and there's music blaring and all of this, uh, distraction. And, like
Yeah.
you're gonna have a very different experience than when you're in a calm place.
Right.
You're working with a therapist or you're with trusted friends and you're all
Right.
there to get something positive out of it. Right?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thing about these substances where it really just amplifies the energy of the space around you, and it
Absolutely.
has to be the right energy, the right
Yep.
set.
Yeah, and we've talked about that too, and that's
Mhm.
why I wanted to highlight the aspect of response of, you know, using these substances in a responsible manner. And I think even in the shamanic practices, it's considered sacred, right? And I think part of the
That's it.
problem we see is people get access to these things and then they're not really responsible with it, or they're not using it in the way they're intended to be used. And that's where you can often have unintended consequences. So I think it's important to highlight that. So I guess in your case, you read Michael Pollan's book, you got a better understanding of the history and some of the challenges that we encountered in the West in the 50s and the 60s with, again, people being irresponsible and some of the consequences that were taking place based on
Mhm.
that. So at that point, what was it like for you? What was like, okay,
Yeah,
what was the next thing?
the next step, I guess. Yeah, so I guess, I read that book and, even prior to, reading that book, I had a long interest in these kinds of things. I just thought it was, yeah, I just thought it was very, very, very interesting. I was never really the type of person that if I was going to try something like this, I would just go out and do it. There's great websites that have been out there for a long time, like Eurowid
Right.
and whatnot, where you can read a lot about, how things work, the pharmacological aspects and everything. It's just something I've been interested in for, since I was a young adult, so to speak.
For sure.
Yeah. And then, so yeah, before I decided to book this trip, it was kind of one of these bucket list things I had, uh, both to go to, South America in general, to go see the Amazon rainforest, and then,
Hmm.
to try ayahuasca one day, which, also seemed, just very interesting to me. I guess I can mention another, author, which, I am still also a big fan of is Dr. Gabor Mate, um,
Yeah.
from Vancouver. So, big fan. I'd read his book, at that time, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts,
Yep.
which, incredible book. Would recommend it, to anyone. He spent a lot of time working on, in the downtown east side of Vancouver and, working with addicts and, and so it's an incredible book. It's a book about addiction and,
Hmm.
how addiction works in our brains and how it affects us, mentally and emotionally. And so in the book, he briefly talks about, he also talks about kind of the emotional body and the physical body. And,
Right.
he briefly mentions things like ayahuasca as well. And so I think that also piqued my interest. It wasn't a book about that, but
Right.
he is kind of part in that space as well. And he,
Right.
he does have talks about ayahuasca
Yep.
and that sort of things too. So yeah, that kind of piqued my interest because I'm like, oh yeah, like, I kind of
Yeah. And I
want to
think
see what this is all
just
about.
to add, yeah, and just to add another piece around Dr. Gabor Mate, because I think not only addiction, but he also talks about trauma and PTSD and how,
Hmm.
uh, ayahuasca can be beneficial in that sense too. Because for people that aren't aware, he's also kind of grew up in at least his family was in part of the concentration camps, and he grew up in
Mhm.
that. So definitely a lot of trauma for him that he inherited as a child too. So there is that aspect of trauma as well that comes into play, in addition to addiction. And a part of it, I would assume that, obviously addiction is often based on trauma too. So just wanted
Oh,
to,
absolutely. It's kind of like addictions are like a mask. You know what I mean? It's something that you're
yeah,
using to, it's something you're using to kind of run away from pain.
right.
Right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, and it can be something that it's kind of hard baked in. Like it's, you know, it can be a difficult thing to break because it's kind of, you know, it's like one of those tracks in your mind that are so
Yeah.
strong that like you can have the best of intention, but it's hard to, it's just there. Right? And so it takes a lot of work
Absolutely.
to break it for so many people. And you're rooted in trauma, um, especially early childhood trauma. But yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
And he talks about that. And in the realm of Hungry Ghosts, he talks about his upbringing, and I believe it was Hungary, and it was under
Yeah.
Nazi occupation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was, yeah, the fact that, like, you know, fascinating, fascinating kind of, fascinating book, absolutely for sure.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so yeah, so I guess I decided that year that I was like, okay, I'm gonna check this out. You know, I went online and I started looking around, and you know, it's one of those things where you're like, well, you're, how do you find a place to go that is legit and safe? And you know, I did quite a bit of research. You know, used forums like Reddit. Used there's at the time now. I'm sure, you know, this was a few years ago. I'm sure there's different websites and stuff now, but there was websites like Retreat Guru and Advisors where you know people can go to rent different say retreat centers or places that are offering these kinds of services, and you can
Right.
read the reviews and everything. So I did a bunch of research. I ended up settling on a spot that had quite a bit of good reviews. You know, people on Reddit said that you know it was pretty good, and so I
Mm.
kind of just took the plunge and uh, ended up. And so I booked I booked a similar kind of thing to the Vipassana thing. It was like a New Year's, uh, uh 10 days over New Year's, starting in December and going into
Right.
January. And it was the place I went was in Peru, and it was called the Arcana Spiritual Center. They're still around. You know, great spot. I would recommend it
Yeah.
to anyone.
Yeah.
There's lots of places that do it, but I mean that place was,
Hmm.
and kind of just took a plunge and then flew out. Uh,
Yeah.
there was a bit of preparation that was involved. You know, they sent you. I'd done a bunch of research myself, but then they also sent you a bunch of you know, preparatory stuff like a
Right.
in the lead up to this trip for as long as you can, but at least 20 or 30 days. I can't remember exactly what it was, but avoid certain things like avoid red meat, try to avoid as much salt as possible, avoid
Right.
caffeine, obviously avoid any kind of alcohol, drugs.
Right.
You know, you really want to you really want to cleanse any uh, kind of food or substance or even activity that just just you know, from what I can see now, it just causes like big dopamine spikes. I think like you
Yep.
really want to, you know, they also said avoid sex for as long as possible. So like, you know,
Right.
no sex or masturbation or whatever for you
Right.
know, at least a couple of weeks, but for as long as possible before you go, just to kind of, you know, get yourself a very kind of baseline level. And
Mhm.
but yeah, no, I followed that. You know, it was kind of interesting following all of those guidelines and during Christmas season because you know you're kind of it's like, you know, Christmas is generally, you know, the time of kind of hedonism in our culture a little bit, a
Yeah.
lot of sugary and salty stuff or whatever. But I did like, but I followed the rules and best I could,
Right.
and showed up,
And
flew
that's
from here.
and I think part of it is to maximize that experience, right? I mean,
Oh, of course.
you want it to get the most out of it, especially if you're
Yeah.
committing to something. So, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry, before you jump into it, what was like the conversation like with friends and family telling them like, "Hey, I'm going on to do this," because obviously there's still, I wouldn't say stigma around it, but I think it's still kind of, people do get curious and
Absolutely.
wonder
Oh yeah.
what's going on with this guy, right?
Yeah. 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 No, absolutely. I would say, I mean, I told my family and my close friends, I didn't broadcast to the world, hey, this is what I'm
Right.
doing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as far as friends go, like I pretty much just told the people that I be like, oh, wow, like that's really interesting. Like, are you sure
Yeah.
it's going to be like, stay safe, of course. Are you sure you're going to like, some place that's not a scam or some
Yeah.
place that's like, legit or safe? And I'm like, yeah, no, I did. I'm like, I did as much as I could in my own power as far as research or whatever. Right. And,
Yeah.
and in fact, family was an interesting thing too, right? Because, it kind of, I definitely grew up in a culture where this type of thing is like, not a wheelhouse. And
Yeah.
so
No.
and I was like, it just is what it is, right? And so,
Yeah.
but I was like, well, I'm not gonna lie to my parents and family or tell. And I told them exactly what I was doing. I was like, hey,
Yeah.
this is what I'm doing. This is where I'm going. I don't think that you're going to be able to contact me, but you might be able to, like, you just send these people an email or a phone or
Yeah.
whatever, right? But I'm literally going to be in the middle of the jungle somewhere. I have no idea what reception to be like or whatnot, or
Right.
internet, or I don't know. And so, but I told them, and I think my my dad was like, he was, there's been, at least at that point,
Yeah.
so it's a few years ago now, there was in news articles of like, oh, like, there's this trend of just people from the West
Right.
going down and going on these retreats.
Yeah.
It's really only the horror stories that made it onto the news. Right.
Of
And so
course.
there was a couple of, there was somebody that, kind of had a bad reaction and kind of went, crazy and stabbed somebody. Or I don't know. Like if you searched like, like the ayahuasca
Yeah.
or news or whatever, you just find like, the outlier horrible thing.
Of course.
That's what you
Yeah.
find in the news, right? And so
Right.
I see my dad like looked it up after I told him about it. He's like, whoa, like, are you sure what you're doing is safe? And I'm like, yeah, it's safe. I'll take care of myself. Like, and then he's like, okay. So obviously there was that kind of baseline level of worry or whatnot.
Right.
Um, it wasn't so bad. I mean, I kind of made the
Yeah.
decision for it. So I
For
just went.
sure.
And
Cool.
so,
Yeah. So then, okay. So then you get there, you flew out there and yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So I get there, I flew out there. So you flew from here to Lima and from Lima to Iquitos. Iquitos is kind of the hub city for the Amazon in Peru.
Yep.
Um, uh, it's a very third world city, but it's kind of the spot where all of the kind of uh, the biggest kind of hub cities, all the villages and smaller towns in the Amazon will kind of feed into Iquitos, and it's
Right.
where the trade is. And there was I hung out there for a couple of days. Luckily, it was a lot easier to follow the diet once I got there because they've got restaurants and cafes that cater specifically, the kind of tourist that is going on these kinds of things. And so you can
Yeah.
find like, ayahuasca friendly menus or whatnot, which is great because I was eating really healthy, smoothie bowls for breakfast and like all the just super healthy food.
Yeah.
I got there a few days before because I wanted to just explore a bit, went to some like animal sanctuaries and uh, museums and that kind of stuff. And I
Mhm.
met up with this group. And then uh, was about, I think it took about a day, early morning to the end of the day for us to get to where we were going. A mix of bus and kind of like motocaros, which are like rickshaws,
Yep.
and boat. And eventually, after say 6-7 hours, we got to the center, which
Right.
kind of somewhere in the middle of the jungle, close to a really small town or like a small village.
Hmm.
The village kind of supported the retreat center. Like a lot of the cooks, and they
Yep.
were it employed the local village essentially.
Hmm.
And uh, yeah, so then we got there, and then I started writing. I bought a specific journal like for that trip, and I started writing this journal. I was like, okay, every single day that I'm here, I'm going to just record my experience as best as possible.
Right.
And so it was really nice, actually. One of the nice things with this podcast, which I was saying before we started, is I got a chance to read through this journal, like relive the
Yeah.
experience. Um, but yeah, so then I so great group of people. For one, I was really lucky, and for some reason, when I got there, there was only about 10 of us, and that had booked this retreat. And usually they have more.
Right.
But there was, for some reason, the date that I booked, there wasn't very many of us as far as participants. And then there was a lot of facilitators. They probably had 5, 6 facilitators. So that were working at the retreat center, either as staff or as volunteers. And so we
Yeah.
actually got a lot of time with the facilitators, and a lot of individual attention, which is great. Um, Usually they would have double the amount of participants as we had.
Right. And they
Um,
spoke English.
yeah. So the facilitators
Okay.
spoke English.
Yeah.
They spoke English, and they were able to translate from Spanish. So the shamans were all from the Shipibo tribe in the Amazon, which, ayahuasca is, at least in Peru, is a very traditional part of like Shipibo culture.
Hmm.
And so we weren't in, I believe that was a little bit the Shipibo like area where they live in the Amazon, was a little bit south of where we were, but they were from, like the shamans were from. And
Okay.
and the retreat itself was based on their methodology and whatnot.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was interesting. They did a bit of like an intake session individually with you, where you would go in, and the shaman would be there, and then a facilitator would be there, and you would introduce yourself. You're like, this is me, these are my experiences, hey, these are maybe some of the mental blocks I'm trying to work through,
Yeah.
fears and anxieties. And, what we're basically, they're like, why did you come here? Like, what are you trying
Yeah.
to get out of this type of a thing? And
Of
then
course.
you would explain it, and they would translate it into Spanish for the shaman. The shaman would do a little bit of back and be like, okay, just so they have an idea. And then, yeah. And then you go, and then you kind of go out. And I mean, I guess I could describe the place itself was really beautiful. Again, someone like me that, it was my bucket list to just go to this, this
Yeah.
jungle in general. Just the sounds of the Amazon jungle are incredible. Uh, and it changes from the time of day, like it's never quiet. It's always like you're always hearing like some kind of insect or bird or animal, or leaves rustling in the wind, or rain, or like it's noisy all of the time. And depending on what time of day you're in, the noises always change. So it's really incredible to just listen to it.
Yeah.
I brought a field recorder with me, and took like recordings of various times of day. So sometimes I can go back and
Yeah.
listen to those recordings, which is nice. Um,
Yeah.
but the yeah, and then the whole place was built on stilts. It's all built out of wood, and so we were in the lowest, like the water was there's, I guess, the rainy season and the dry season. So we
Yeah.
were in the dry season, but everything is built on stilts, so that when the water rises, you're still able to not, you're all raised and elevated. Um, Insects everywhere, biggest spiders I've ever seen, big
Yeah.
beetles. Like it's pretty incredible.
That's the thing
It's
that
just
scares me.
yeah, a lot of mosquitoes. And they told you like don't wear DEET, like don't wear
Yeah.
any synthetic insect repellent. It's going to interfere with just
Right.
negative energy, and so they recommended citronella, and so it'd just be or like kind of natural repellent. So just kind of like, but citronella doesn't last 12 hours like DEET does. You put it on and it lasts for like an hour. So putting citronella on all the time because there's so many mosquitoes,
Mm,
and obviously you don't want to. They have things like dengue fever and yellow fever,
yeah.
and had to get all these shots obviously before I went.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
I didn't I
Yeah.
didn't take the,
I
they
was gonna
told
say
me
you're
don't.
really selling it.
Yeah. And one of the things they told is like, let's see, you can get the shots for all of that, and then
Right.
malaria is the thing too. But then they also
Yeah.
recommended like if you can avoid it, don't take the malaria pill. So that was an interesting thing too. I guess this is all on a side from the experience in general. I think, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
thought that
No,
was
I think
interesting.
it's for sure. For sure.
I
To
decided
your point, it's avoiding all the low energy states, right? And not
exactly.
having those things in your body for sure. Getting the
Yeah.
full spiritual experience.
Getting the full thing. And so they recommended not, they said, you know what, you can take it if you want to, but they recommend not taking a malaria medication. They're like, if you get malaria, they're like, we can get you to a hospital. It's a few hours away. But just, the chances are small. But they're like, it can interfere. Right. And so, yeah, so then you end up, there's, um, there was a couple of kind of pre-ceremonies that we kind of when we got there. One of the ones that was interesting was called Kambo. The whole idea is to like purge as much
Hmm.
negative energy as possible. Kambo, it's like an extract from a frog that is from there. They take like a kind of like a burning. They take us like a stick, and then they light it on fire, and then they put the fire out, and then they put the burning stick on a part of your skin, and then there's they take this frog extract, and I think it's mixed with a little bit of saliva, and then they rub it on your skin, and it gets into your body through that wound, I guess. And
Mm.
then, you kind of, I don't really know the mechanism of how it works. I went back and I read my journal and kind of remember the experience. And remember, you ended up getting, like, you did a bunch of we meditated for a while ahead of it, about half an hour, and then had this experience. And I remember just getting really, really hot, and then they would douse you with cold water, and then you kind of went back into a meditative state, and um, and started meditating, and
Mm.
yeah, just remember feeling almost like calmness, like things washed
Right.
away. So they and then so over the course of the week, I think there was 4 or 5 ayahuasca ceremonies.
Yeah.
I think it might have been 4, and ahead of each one, they really told you like, okay, you know, do a little bit of writing, set your intention before you go
Mm.
in. You're in this kind of a thatched hut, big thatched hut called a maloka. You have a mattress to yourself, with a pillow and a blanket, and you sit on this mattress, and you're all in a circle facing
Mm.
towards the middle,
Right.
and you go and they start preparing the ayahuasca. You're sitting there, you're just meditating, relaxing, probably thinking of your intentions there.
Hmm.
And then one by one, they'll call you up. And you do this at nighttime only. So it's already,
Yeah.
maybe 5, 6 p.m. It's starting to get dark outside. And then you come and you take, and then you drink, it's like a shot glass full of this liquid. I mean, it's made, I guess we could talk a little bit about what it is. It's DMT,
Yeah.
but it's DMT.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's DMT that's made from a DMT containing plant. So they
Yeah.
traditionally chacruna leaves. So chacruna is a plant, a DMT containing plant, and from there. And then, but the thing about DMT is that it's you can't normally like ingest DMT.
Hmm.
Your body will just digest it. You know, it won't do anything if you just
Right.
normally had sugar tea or
Yeah.
something, for example. Right. And
Right.
so what the second component of ayahuasca, or second main component, is ayahuasca vine itself, which is like Banisterius capi. And that contains what's called an MOAI inhibitor. And
Hmm.
what that does is it prevents your body from breaking down the DMT in your digestive system.
Hmm.
And so it's and so it basically prevents it from breaking down, and so you can actually have the experience. And so they boil this tea or the substance together and prepare it. It contains both of these things. And then it can contain any number of other additives, plants, whatever,
Right.
whatever the shaman is preparing. But
Yeah.
those are the two.
Right. And what I find fascinating, I
Mhm.
believe it's prepared for several hours,
Mhm.
and the whole concept of the shaman knowing how long to prepare it, what to mix in there is very fascinating. And I think what I've heard is a lot of the times the shaman will say that the plants are talking to them, right? Essentially, that's the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what was really interesting is, so a lot of the volunteers that were there,
Hmm.
were training to be shamans, and were working with the shamans to kind of go deeper and deeper into the practice and being able to do that. And so, really, is what you do to do that. It's called a dieta. And you'll go on retreat in the jungle at one of these retreat centers, or and part of the training is you are in isolation.
Right.
Say very similar to silent meditation. It's like you're not talking to anybody. You're not really interacting. What you're doing, you'll have food that's brought to you. Very simple food, like no salt, spices, nothing. It might just be like rice, boiled fish, or some sort of vegetable, like just enough to kind of give you the nutrients you need.
Right.
And you might spend weeks, months in the jungle, like, on your own in isolation, and and you're just kind of meditating. And what you're doing is you're ingesting say some kind of a plant to be able to get the spirit of the plant. So like, one of the things that they
Mm.
have there is like mapacho, which is like the tobacco is kind of indigenous to that part of the rainforest. And so you
Right.
might be doing like a mapacho data where you'll be drinking like mapacho tea, right? Or you'll have there's various any number of plants, and the idea is you're kind of infusing the spirit of the plant within you for, again, like weeks, months on end. And then that might be
Mm.
interspersed with ayahuasca every so often. And ayahuasca is kind of the portal to the spirit realm that then
Right.
allows you to, like, interact with these plant spirits, but you've already like imbued yourself with the spirit. And again,
Mm.
like, I'm no expert, so don't,
Right.
take what I'm saying as I'm a complete, just someone that's interested in it. But but I mean, if you want to do further research, don't take me as an authority in it, in any
Yeah.
matter here. But it was
Absolutely.
fascinating because I was talking to, some of the people that were going through this. They were there because they wanted to learn. Again, the more you dive deep, right, the more you learn. So that's what they were
Yep.
there for. People from all over the world. And uh, so yeah, the whole idea is the shamans do know what to add. It obviously, it's been passed on through oral tradition
Hmm.
for thousands of years. This is part of their culture. And um, so yeah, so I guess back to the Maloka. We're there. We take the you take as much of the ayahuasca they give you. You go sit back on your mattress, and then I guess so also by your mattress you've got some kit. You've got a bucket that's
Hmm.
basically a purge bucket.
Yeah.
So one of the things about the ayahuasca what are these about ayahuasca in general, but actually just the ayahuasca vine is that it is a
Mm,
purgative. So it can be used as a medicine, even if you don't mix it with DMT or chacruna leaf. It's a purgative. So say if you have worms or some kind of parasitic infection
mm,
or something, like it's it makes you throw up, and it makes you
yeah.
basically expel toxins from your body, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so part of ayahuasca is the whole purgative aspect of it. And so you've got a bucket, you got to throw up, it's it. And there is they give you a bit of mapacho, which is the tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've kind of pre-rolled these mapacho cigarettes or whatever. And so uh, it can help you get into, say, if you're kind of drifting or losing focus, it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
a it can help kind of get you back into the zone.
Mm,
And so that's kind of, I guess, the way I can describe it. It's like a
right.
synergistic effect, say. And so, you can have it if you want, you can not have it if you want.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
they have some Palo Santo wood. Yeah, and it's like, you can find Palo Santo wood here and, shops where it's kind of like a wood that you could burn that kind of has
Right.
like a nice smell. And so they use
Right.
Palo Santo to kind of purge spirits. So ahead of
Yeah.
you going into the Maloka, they've got like a kind of like a swinging little burner where they kind of use it to purge the spirits around the Maloka. And
Mm,
then you've got your own little one there too. And
mm-hmm.
Agua de Florida, which is this really strange kind of perfume that
Mm,
that they use, and it's used a lot actually in shamanistic contexts, and like across the Central and South America. Like, I think in Haiti they use it a lot too, and like voodoo, and in the Amazon. But it's just kind of like I don't know, this really like floral. I don't think it smells very good, but it's like almost like a perfume. And,
yeah. Yeah.
like, yeah. Anyways, just tools of the trade, I guess. So you have your own little bottle
Yeah.
of it too, right? And the at least that's the way it was at Arcana. Again, not all ayahuasca centers are going to be the same, but I
Right.
guess to go into them without going into every single day and every single trip in super detail, because again we did this, we had 4 of these sessions, I believe. um
So
I
that
guess
was,
one thing I
sorry, just to kind of understand better. So over
yeah.
the course of the 10 days, you
Mhm.
had 4 of these trips where you consumed ayahuasca, and obviously uh, the trip itself would last anywhere up to 10 hours, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I would say like 5-6 hours.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah, and you're there the whole time, and eventually you can just get up and go back to your room and go to sleep or whatever. Or you
Yeah.
could fall asleep inside the Moloka if you wanted to, and wake at any time of the night. Yeah. It's very like you're there, and obviously you are. It could be anywhere from being very visual. Uh, so I would say like the first time I took it, so the very first night, it was it was very visual, and then also I could feel it physically. I kind of had this almost like a feeling of, as it was coming on, like a snake kind of
Mm,
slithering around my body. I couldn't really feel the snake, but then I remember I had a visual of a really an old friend of mine, an old female friend, that which was very interesting. And she was there, and she was there actually with her little daughter. She's a close friend of mine. That she lives in a single mom. She lives in Ontario or whatnot. But anyways, that's fine. Old friend from a long time ago. But she appeared, and she was almost like having a conversation with me, and she was kind of out there. And I remember when that went away, I saw like some trees and a monkey, and and you're kind of, it's almost like you're awake but you're dreaming. It's
mm,
like a very
mm-hmm.
much like a waking dream, and you're
Yeah.
there, and you're really just trying to observe, right? and
Right.
and and you're just trying to meditate your way through it, breathe, and
Mm,
just observe what's going on. And, it's showing you things, and you don't know why it's showing them to you, right? Or why
Right.
you're manifesting things the way that you are. But, you are, you just, thing to do is to just let it go, take it in.
Right.
And so the first time I did it, it was quite pleasant. It
Mm,
wasn't, I didn't have any nausea, anything. I saw these really interesting things the next day. So after that night, after every night, you do a kind of, a group sharing session where everybody describes what they what their experience was. You can also go and you can talk individually to shamans if it's something that you don't want to share as a group or you're uncomfortable sharing as a group. Um, but the next day, you all meet again in Moloka and do a group sharing session. And one of the things they said about me is that they regard ayahuasca as like a very feminine spirit, almost like a grandmother spirit, and
mm,
it's very feminine. And so, they said, yeah, it's interesting that, you have a kind of a close, feminine female figure in your life, somebody that you trust, and
mm,
someone whose advice that you would take, seriously, because it's somebody that you
mm,
trust and look up to. That she appeared, and it was almost like the medicine is kind of showing you through that vision that, like, trust me. You know what I mean?
mm.
Like, like everything is gonna be okay. Like, listen to what I
Right.
have to say. So I was like, that's
Yeah.
interesting. So that's kind of the way they explained that to me, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and then I remember the next couple of times, I had, and this was everyone has a very different experience, but it became a lot more physical for me, where
Mm,
there was times where it was quite uncomfortable. I would get into like this really like, oh, I wouldn't say negative mind state, but almost like a mind spiral, like kind of,
mm,
what you would call, say, a quote unquote trip or whatnot. But you're in a
mm.
very safe spot. We talk set and
Right.
setting. Not set was and setting was incredible. You're in this, um,
Right.
beautiful hut. You can hear the sounds of the rain and the jungle and the grasshoppers and bats and
Yep.
whatever is happening, right? And you but you got this thing, and this is very specific to me. Everyone had their own thing, but I had this thing where my right hand would involuntarily like twitch, twitch to the point where it's like I couldn't control it. It's like, almost like I lost control of my arm and it would start twitching. And I would be like, I would try to like breathe and calm it down and be like, well, that's interesting. Like, it's like a twitch. I can't stop. And, I was trying a lot to use what I'd learned, the previous year and through my meditative practice of, okay, let's just like sit and observe, like the whole Vipassana technique of insight
Right.
meditation, where it's just like, hone your intention, like, on whatever this thing is, to try and work through it and peel it back like
Hmm.
an onion. And, I'd say like one practice really helped with the other, but
Right.
then, it was, so the first time that happened, I was like, okay, maybe I need to learn how to soothe this arm, like by trying to like pull the negative energy out of it, press it, like whatever. You're just trying to learn, be like, what is this trying to show me? First, I thought, I'm like, oh, maybe this is trying to tell me that when I'm older, people, when they get old, sometimes the people get like things like, Parkinson's or whatever. I'm like, maybe this
Yep.
is showing me that this is something that I'm going to be susceptible to when I'm older. I had all these
Right.
thoughts going through my mind, like, what is this? Um,
Yeah.
that was also the first time I had the experience of purging, which, I was kind of in this negative mind spiral state. I really had to throw up, and then I threw up in my bucket. And it was actually, that was a really interesting experience, because it really was a purge, right? Like we said, like ayahuasca is a
Yep.
purgative. And it's meant to release parasites, but then
Mm,
DMT is kind of something that really helps you access your emotional body and bring you into, like, almost like a spirit realm, as to, how
yep.
they would say it. And so you're going through some kind of emotional thing and blockage and mind spiral in your head, and then you purge it out, and suddenly it's like this emotional weight has been lifted. right? So it really is this like, I think that's one of the most interesting things about it. It's like a very mind body thing, and your mind and your body are one system, right? But it's almost like you can purge. It's like you purge emotional blockages and things through the physical mechanism
Right.
of vomit, right? Or or you can go to the bathroom as well. Right? And the thing is, like, you can open your eyes. You have enough wherewithal to grab your little flashlight, turn on the red light on your headlamp, and like walk to the
Yeah.
bathroom and go to the bathroom. It's not like you're just like incapacitated sitting on your bed.
Yeah.
Like you can do these things, right?
For sure.
And you can go like wash your hands, wash your face, go back, sit back down on your bed, close your eyes, and there you are again.
Hmm.
So that was interesting. One of the other things that we did on this retreat, which which was quite interesting, was what they call Sapo at the retreat, but it's 5-MeO DMT, and so 5-MeO is basically it's a form of DMT that is it comes from the Sonoran desert toad.
Okay.
So it's not from the Amazon, actually. It's from like
Right.
the Sonoran Desert in the southern United States and Mexico. And and it's probably where, where you hear in like in culture or whatever of like, you hear of like toad is like, being
Yep.
this like psychedelic thing. But I imagine this is where it comes from. But it's actually an
Right.
extract, the toad's back that they can collect and put the toad back in the wild. And anyways, it contains a substance called 5-MeO DMT. And so they had it as an add-on to this retreat. And DMT is they kind of call it the spirit molecule, and 5-MeO
Yep.
DMT they kind of call the God molecule. So they kind of had it. And so this actually I mention it because I think it was quite, to me, it was it was actually quite formative to the experience. And it changed my ayahuasca ceremonies moving forward after that, because we kind of had half the ayahuasca ceremonies, 2 before and then 2 after
Yep.
this 5-MeO. And what is they collect this crystal, and then and then they kind of heat it up, and then you end up smoking it. And this was a
Yep.
daytime thing. You're in the Maloka. And what I found about that, and so Michael Pollan actually in
How to
How to
change
Change
your
Your
mind.
Mind. Yeah,
Yeah.
he did this too, and I can't remember if he did it with 5-MeO DMT or just regular DMT, because he'd smoke regular crystal like freebase DMT
All
in
right.
the same way, right? But he kind of spoke about it, and like the universe kind of like, it's like you're there, and then suddenly it's like you're zooming out, and like the
Yeah.
universe kind of disintegrates to the Big Bang, and then it reintegrates back to you. It's very fast. It only lasts like
Mm.
not 10 minutes, right? And 5 to 10 minutes max. And that's the big difference between ayahuasca and just smokable DMT.
Right.
That DMT is processed super soon. It's very strong. It's processed super fast by your body, and then it's gone. And it's a very intense experience, but it's gone. But ayahuasca lasts hours because it's in your digestive tract. It can do different things. But I guess what I found then and after doing that is I remember similar kind of thing as Michael Pollan described. It's just like, whoa, everything kind of went blurred away. You kind of went into this energy field. It's hard to describe. It was almost like this big white energy field, and then yourself dissolves. So like it's like you're, like normal life, like you're an observer,
Yeah.
everything, your waking consciousness is kind of a sensory input. And you kind of have your ego that sees everything as you are a self, but it was kind of like yourself dissolves and you're just kind of part of, you
So
know,
what was
yeah,
that like a death experience? Because I mean, I've heard people see,
could be.
the light
Yeah.
and that whole idea of dissolving, and maybe it's more of an ego death,
Mhm.
because obviously we don't know what that phase of our existence looks like or what, but yeah, okay. No, I just wanted to kind of get some context around that.
And it could have been. right? It could have been, right?
Right.
And like part of it is like it's actually it's actually hard to let. It's very difficult to let your ego go, right? Because
Mm,
it's almost, I think, I think it is almost like death in the sense,
right.
we have a natural, probably hard baked desire to not die, right?
Yes.
And so,
Yeah.
and yourself is really like is a, uh, you that is how you define your existence, right? Like I am
Correct.
me, really. But what, like,
Yeah.
what is me? You know what I mean? Like we're made up of a series of internal organs that are all their own functioning systems that make a system, right? We're full of bacteria. Like there's more bacterial cells in our body that, than human cells, really. Right.
Correct.
And then they become like part of yourself, right? Like, is the human body just a vessel for these bacteria? Like, who knows?
Yeah.
Like, but it is like, regardless of all that, our perception is that we are a self, like I am me, right? And you don't want to let that go. But
Right.
an experience like this is, you really have to just like succumb to be like, oh yeah, like, what's gonna happen. And eventually it was, as I remember, like just being in this, like, I really wasn't me anymore. There was just this energy kind of field
Right.
of, and you know what, like I have a lot of, I've read a lot of books, and maybe we can get into it later, but I have a few ideas of, kind of like consciousness, and part of it stems from these experiences and the experiences of others, and reading done. But, but anyways, it was the coming back that was quite interesting, because I remember that, I came back, and then everything I like, it's like my vision suddenly came back, but it was extremely blurry. Saw some blurry figures in the in my visual field. And
Right.
and at the time, and at the time I kind of interpreted it, and I still interpret it this way, as it was almost like a baby being born. And
Right.
like when babies are born, they can't really see. Your eyes don't
Yeah.
really hone in on your visual field for I don't know for how long,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
but like weeks, maybe. Like I don't, but I do know just from reading that, baby can't see laser sharp focus when they're first born. It takes a
Right.
while, right? And
Yeah.
so at that time, um, I kind of interpreted it like, whoa, maybe this is like what I first saw when I was born. Like, maybe that's like my parents or the doctor or like whatever. And I remember that
Mm,
like overwhelming feeling of like just gratitude. Like it was a very powerful, very, very, very powerful experience. Because you're kind of experiencing these things, but you still have your experiences today. It's like your adult mind being able to go back and relive certain experiences. And what I saw was like that I kind of experienced that way. And it was very overwhelming. Like I started crying. I was like, holy,
yeah.
is this what being born was like? You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and what I found was, uh, I was able to kind of relive some experiences of my childhood, and that happened again on next couple ayahuasca sessions that I did, where there was some discomfort, especially at
Yeah.
first, where you're kind of learning to let go. Arm would be shaking, right? And then like the shamans would kind of help, would do
Yep.
they sing these really beautiful songs called
Mm,
Icaros, which kind of guide your experience,
mm,
um, and kind of put you in tune with them. And then you might purge or whatnot, and then as soon as you purge and whatever was kind of blocking you, you can kind of like, it's like you've let go and you can dive deep. I remember that it was one of the things that I took the most out of it. I was able to go back to like being a kid, like in you know, 3, 4, 5 years old, all through
yeah.
elementary school, all through junior high. And I was able to like, there was a lot of memories that I hadn't really thought about or even really remembered to this point, where it's just like, like I would just sit there and I would be like, or I was sitting there and I was remembering like, oh, like, hey, these are my friends. This is like something my teacher told me at that time. These are like, it was like interesting. It was like all these memories that were unlocked, and I was able to relive a lot of experiences as a kid. But at the same time, I had the mind of an adult, right? Like I was there. And so one of the things that I was trying to do is, as me as a kid I was basically reliving these childhood experiences, I was almost able to like act like a mentor to myself. You know what I mean? It's like I could give my
Yeah.
kid self advice. At least this is the way that I was playing it, right? Again, like
Right.
everybody else that was around me was having different experiences, but I think
Yeah.
just based on my own experiences today and kind of how I wanted to guide my own journey is what I was doing.
Yep.
So I was kind of reliving these childhood experiences, uh, and then I was giving my childhood self, advice or encouragement, or
Right.
like, hey, like this bad thing is happening to you right now, like that,
Mm.
whatever it was in junior high, like, that really pissed you off, right? But it's like, don't
Right.
worry about it. In the grand scheme of things, this doesn't really matter. Or like,
Right.
hey, like, this thing that you're doing in grade 6, but I was really into some hobby or something. It's kind of like, hey, that's really cool. Like you're actually going to still like doing this on your own. So like, good for
Right.
you, and,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and
So
so,
sorry, I was gonna say, I
yeah,
think it's interesting, right? Because we talked about those paths that we
yeah,
carve in our life. So you were almost forging new paths. And the reason I can relate is I've had similar experiences in therapy where I've had to like comfort my childhood self. But it also brings up a concept in my mind that time isn't really linear, right? In a way, because you were able to re-experience those things.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Anyways, I wanted to throw that in there
Yeah, no, and
amongst
I
everything
totally agree
else.
with you. Yeah, like time, exactly. Like we experience time like as being linear, but
Right.
it, uh, yeah, it might not, like, as if you can get away from our own conscious experience. Yeah, it may not be linear, and things like this can help you access,
Mm.
basically go back and relive them like as if you were there. But you can
Right.
combine your present self with your past self, and who knows, maybe your future self. You just
Yep.
don't recognize that it was
Right.
your future self when
Well,
it's happening,
and
right?
that's the whole idea of manifestation. And I've been
Hmm.
reading a lot of Carl Jung lately, and he talks about synchronicity, which is essentially, in a way, you're tapping into this unconscious, collective unconscious, and you're picking up it. So, like this whole idea where we have deja vu type of experiences from our dreams and all of that. That's to your point. I believe we're tapping into that future self.
Hmm.
But also, I think part of that whole spiritual essence, he talks about us really going back to that childlike state and finding that that's where we can experience peace, love, and joy.
Hmm.
But yeah, no. So I guess coming out of all of that, like, what was that whole experience like? How did that culminate for you?
Yeah. So I would say like that, like diving into my childhood self really was like probably like the third session. And then I remember the fourth session, I was still kind of like, still had the arm twitch, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And still trying to figure out what it was. And I remember I went into it and I'm like, okay, let's figure this out. There was a few really interesting, again, it went actually quite visual that time around, where, I think one of the things that I was working at that time through, just like fears in my life, or maybe just fear in general, just like lack
Mm.
of courage, like, if I wanted to do something, or something was bothering me, it's like just, like having the courage to be able to do those things and working past fear. And I remember the first session, it was just like, it was almost like that feminine figure appeared. And I can't remember if it
Mm.
was my friend or not, but it was a feminine figure. And she was just kind of like, like the courage, it's inherent, like already in you, and I remember
Mm.
seeing it as almost like this, like my chest. And then as soon as I realized that and being able to like let go of fear, I just kind of went into this, uh, again, this is my own experience, but it was almost like this wormhole where you were kind of going through. And then, so DMT is, you read about DMT, or for anyone who's ever tried it, traditionally you see a lot of geometric patterns and,
Mhm.
colors, and, it's quite surreal in in a sense. Actually, it reminds me a lot of like Arabesque and Islamic like architecture and patterns, right? But like I remember going into this wormhole and getting past what seemed almost like negative spirits into almost like a plane of, whoa, like this is where you get to when you overcome fear. Like you can do whatever
Mm,
you want. You know what I mean? Like, the world is open to you. And I remember like having that feeling. And then and then I remember I kind of uh felt I kind of figured out how to deal, or at least one interpretation of maybe like what was happening to my arm. And one of the things with ayahuasca ceremonies is that there's plant spirits, but there's also the spirits of the jungle. And like a pretty common one is kind of like a jaguar or cat. And it kind of felt like that spirit was there. And it was kind of like telling me, and maybe it was integrating what some of the facilitators were saying as well, where they were just like, hey,
right.
you need to kind of live like life is about balance, right? You need to be able to balance your masculine energy. You need to balance feminine energy. They both need to be in balance to live like, like a balanced life. And one arm is like masculine energy. It's out of check, right? It's going around, it's flailing. It can use the other arm or other parts of your body to kind of calm it down. But in the same thing, the power of that unchecked, once you have that power in check, you can use it to help the other side as well.
Mhm.
And so I think this is kind of glossing over it a little bit, but it was one of the things. It's like balancing, because afterwards I was talking to some of the facilitators about it, is that, like trying to balance the various facets of your life, balancing, say, like your right hemisphere and your left hemisphere, balancing your masculine
Yeah.
energy and your feminine energy, and having them all kind of nurture one another.
Mm,
And I think that's kind of how I was able to deal with I kind of interpreted the arm shaking as kind of just
right.
like unchecked energy, that, this energy is a powerful thing. You also need to be
Hmm.
able to control it, to harness it properly.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with that. I think that's kind of our purpose in life is to harness that energy and find that right balance.
mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I guess
And
that's, oh, sorry.
no, no, yeah, I think my next question was, and I know we've used up a lot of the time, but
Yeah.
to kind of wrap things up a little bit here, but how's that whole experience changed your outlook on life? And obviously, it was a while ago, a few years ago,
Mhm.
but how have you been able to use that experience in your day-to-day experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think, um, like it's another form of knowledge, I guess. It's
Mm,
hard to, coming back to reality. I think it's one of these things like why I love these retreats and why I love kind of cutting out the regular world and
yeah.
going and learning and learning these things, because it's like our modern worlds is there's just so much, right? There's, this
Mm,
constant stream of information. The modern working world is insane, and the amount of emails you get and the amount of output that you're expected to provide. And so
right.
you just get caught up in the day to day,
Yep.
and you don't think, right? But I think as far as being able to integrate it in my life, I think from a spiritual standpoint, I really, I guess for one thing, like, maybe not that I was really afraid of death before, but I'm
Mm,
really not, maybe less,
right.
less afraid. I'm definitely less fearful.
Mm,
Before I maybe would not have the courage to do certain things that I wanted to do. But, um, you know, um, I would say I worked through a lot of that. Um, Maybe less resentful of uh, things in my past.
Right.
Everything in your past that has kind of occurred today made you who you are now, and whether it was
Right.
positive or negative, there's really nothing you can do about it other than learn from it. And so resentment isn't really, it doesn't really help. And
Mm,
so I would say cutting, I was able to, maybe some of the resentments that I did have from the past or regrets or those types of things,
right.
you know, um, being able to work through those, they don't bother things that, they bother me less, for example, right?
Right.
But, it still takes work. None of these things are some silver bullet to the problem and you're like, not at all. Right.
Right.
I think you can see the, I think maybe they can show you what, um, what it is to be, incredibly grateful. The amount of gratefulness I felt on that trip for all of the, like I remember reading my journal, like in the lead up to this interview was actually fantastic. And I'm just like, yeah, it was cool. It was cool to read all my trip reports, from like it was
Yeah.
cool, like I blast down this wormhole, but I think what was even better was like, okay, what did I learn? Um, and I remember like, one of the big things was like this overwhelming feeling of gratefulness for maybe not just the positive experiences in my life, but the negative ones too.
Right. Right.
All of the teachers that I had, like one of the things I've written is like, that expression where it's like you're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants. Well, like everybody has taught you anything are the people that you're standing on the shoulders of, right? And really every
Right.
single experience, every single interaction, like everybody is your teacher. Every single
Right.
interaction you have with anybody, like can teach you something, um,
Absolutely.
and so that idea that everybody is your teacher, um,
Right.
and
Yeah.
and so I think going through an experience where I was, really able to dive into past experience and re- um, and and be grateful, like the amount of gratefulness I felt, like just in that feeling of what I perceived as birth or whatnot, was like, holy
Hmm.
moly, like, we're just super lucky to be alive and that we're
Yeah.
really lucky even just to be able to experience the universe in the way that we do, right? Like we're just a
Hmm.
collection of, you know, uh, sensory organs that, can kind of look outward onto this
Right.
mystery.
Right.
Really, there's just really grateful for what you
Yeah.
have, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what
And
this
and I
is.
yeah. And then just kind of hearing that, it's like
Yeah,
the gratitude as you mentioned, but even meaning for every situation in life, right? Because often we don't
totally.
see the meaning behind things. And as you mentioned, so because you were able to find meaning for all the experiences,
Mhm.
would you still label some of them as negative now looking back, or would you look at them as experiences that you were meant to have? And we just, because we don't see the full meaning behind it, it's
Mhm.
easier for us to label it as negative, but maybe it's not.
Sure, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting question because certainly, you know, when you look back on some of the quote unquote mistakes in your life
Mm,
or even things that weren't your fault, like
hmm.
the, negative experiences that happened in your life. I wouldn't say they were good. You know what I mean? Like if
Right.
they could have been avoided, it would have been better, right? Or
Right.
everybody's made certain mistakes, and you're just like, wow, had it not
Right.
done that, like things could have been
Yeah.
better. But there's, for sure. But I think it's like, well, there's nothing you can do about it now. So maybe it is not worth calling it negative in the sense that it leads to things like rumination and regret.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
just it happened.
Right.
It could have been negative, but like not all negative experiences are say bad, or they're certainly not warranting of rumination and regret.
Right.
You got to move on
Yeah. Right.
and learn.
Yeah. Yeah. They teach you something, even if
They teach you
in the
something.
moment they're not,
Yeah,
they're painful and as much as you wanted to avoid them, I think they teach you something about yourself. But
yeah,
yeah, I
absolutely.
think that's amazing. Sohail, thank you for coming on here, being so open and vulnerable and sharing everything. I hope the listeners get a lot out of it, and some that
Absolutely.
are curious about this experience can take something away. I definitely learned a lot more. I mean, I've heard bits and pieces from you over
the last year, but to get all of it at once was really cool. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for your time. I know we didn't really schedule this much time, but thank you for being so generous and especially on your days off. So I appreciate that. And like I said, I typically give guests an opportunity to share ways of, if people want to get a hold of them, I'll leave that up to you. If that's something you want to share, but if you don't, that's perfectly fine too. But I think you've shared more than enough today. So like I said, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was my pleasure to come on the podcast. I have a lot of respect for what you're doing and your podcast and your work. And, it's frankly, it's inspiring
Thank
to
you.
me. So it was an honor for me to come on. Uh, and honestly, again, it's been a few years since I went on that particular trip. And so it was actually just a lot of fun for me even to just read through my journal and kind of put myself back there. And you know what? I think even just having done that, it's reminded me of a lot of the good things that I had
Mm,
taken from it. And so, no, definitely a very positive experience for me too. Yeah, and I'm definitely good with if anybody wants to contact me or talk more. I don't. I'm not super active on social media. Uh, my email address is sohayld@gmail.com. I have an Instagram as well. I don't post on it much, but you can certainly be contacted on Instagram. It's the Zeus is my handle. Hand_of_Zeus. And
cool.
so
Yeah. Yeah. No, I could put
email's
that in the
probably the
show notes. Yeah,
yep.
yeah. If you're comfortable with that, I'll definitely put
Yeah,
in
for
the
sure.
show notes. But again, thank you for coming on. I really enjoyed this. I got a lot out of it, as I mentioned, and it was really cool to kind of hear someone's experience firsthand of what this process can be and how healing it can be. And as I mentioned, I will be doing an episode on the therapeutic aspects of psychedelics, so they'll give people a different perspective on it too. But it'll go nicely with this episode to kind of hear both sides of it.
That's, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for checking out this episode with Sohayl. As always, please subscribe to the podcast so you can get more episodes and leave a review or comments in the comment section. I always love hearing from you. Until next week.